Good afternoon, friends. We are Raj and Aradhana Asawa, welcoming you to the Hunger Mitao segment on Fanasia Radio.
Welcome to your show. Please visit ntfb.org/hungermitao to learn how Hunger Mitao, a purely volunteer movement, helps North Texas Food Bank in the fight against hunger.
Friends, the pandemic continues to cause havoc in our lives as number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths reach record levels. While there is good news in the form of vaccine, it is expected to take several months before some level of normalcy returns back in our lives. Until then, millions of people displaced due to economic slowdown, frankly speaking, economic shutdown for many, they are depleting their limited savings as they struggle to make decisions between mortgage, rent, medicine, or food.
I'm sure many of our listeners saw the miles long lines of people waiting to receive food from North Texas Food Bank recently on Saturday, November 14th. In just 3 hours, North Texas Food Bank and other partners distributed more than 600,000 pounds of food to about 25,000 people at the fair park.
The sight was unbelievable, heartbreaking. Due to the pandemic, 1 in 5 North Texans, of which 1 in 4 school going children, are food challenged today. NTFB estimates more than 1 million people in North Texas need help with food, and 40% of them are seeking food assistance for the first time. Aradhna recently spoke with leaders of Feeding America and NTFB to get their perspective on the hunger scene. Let's listen in on this very informative and sobering panel discussion. Please join me in welcoming Brianna Crane of Feeding America and Erin Fincher of North Texas Food Bank. So, Brianna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Anna and Raj, and all of you. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Working at Feeding America gives you a very unique perspective. You have a bird's eye view of the status of food insecurity across the USA. Feeding America, for people who may not know, is the mothership. It's a national organization, and its network includes all of the food banks that we talk about. So there's 200 food banks that are members of Feeding America. So Brianna, from your perspective, what are you seeing? And has this picture changed since COVID?
Sure, and thank you again for this opportunity, Anna. As Raj mentioned and Anna just mentioned now, the need is greater than ever. And the sad fact is, even before this pandemic started, many people in this country experience food insecurity. About 35 million people, which was actually the lowest the numbers had been in more than 20 years. And that's still 1 out of 8 people, including 10 million children, which are still devastating numbers. Of course, when this pandemic started, the need increased considerably. And for the food bank network, the 200 food banks that are part of the Feeding America network, North Texas included, it was a perfect storm of challenges that happened all at once. It was not just the rise in need due to unemployment and uncertainty, but also declines in food donations, disruption to the whole charitable food model. You know, a lot of food banks lost their volunteer corps, or a big majority of them had to change their whole distribution models to be low and no contact distribution or to home delivery models. But in spite of all of that, because of our wonderful supporters and because of the resilience of this food bank network, they've been able to remain strong and resilient and innovative. And I'm sure Erin will have some examples of that for you in a minute. But we are estimating, our research team is estimating that food insecurity over the next year could increase by almost 50%. So another 17 million people could be food insecure as a result of this pandemic, which would be about 1 out of 6. And we anticipate an additional 18 million children, or 1 out of 4 children, could be food insecure in the United States. Wow. Which is just mind-boggling numbers. And although the food bank network has more than tripled the food in our system being distributed from this time frame last year, which is incredible. We're anticipating a food supply gap over the next year that could be the equivalent of about 8 billion meals.
Oh, goodness.
So currently, the 200 food banks together distribute about 5 billion pounds annually, and we're projecting we may need to get to about 17 billion pounds over the next year. So which is a significant challenge, as you can imagine, to meet the increased need. And we know from the Great Recession, last year was the first year we saw food insecurity numbers dipping nationally, and they had doubled during the recession, which started more than 10 years ago. So considering the setbacks that people across the country have faced due to unemployment and businesses closing over the last several months, this could be a crisis that continues for quite a while. And I just want to share one story before I turn it back to you, Anna. I heard this recently, and it just shows you an example of the people that we're serving through our network. 40% of them, we're estimating, are new to the charitable food system, had never been to a food pantry before. And I recently heard a story of a woman who owned her own business. She owned a fitness center in her community, she was a single mom raising her kids. And she had always given part of, her revenue from her business to the food bank. And she found herself in line at the food bank, being served by the people that, she had supported. And they said to her, "You've always been there for us, and now we're happy to be here for you."
Wow. Wow. It's a very grim and sobering picture, Brianna. I mean, we sit in our homes, and now that we can't even step out, we tend to get a little disconnected. But thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Now let's bring the conversation a little closer to home for all of us. Erin Fincher, you have a good idea of what's happening in the 13 counties that North Texas Food Bank serves. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. What are you seeing?
Brianna brought up a lot of different points, but it's been a rough, tough year for all of us. And the whole idea that, that the need is up so much. We expected that probably the need was around 850,000 people that were hungry in our 13 county area before the pandemic. And by the end of the year, it's estimated that 1 million people will be hungry without food, not knowing where their next meal will come from. It's just astounding. That's 1 in 5 people in our community. And of those, 1 in 4, just like the national statistics, will be children. People that these kids don't even have an option. And so the food bank is working really hard to do what we can to provide food to all these people. And we have some good numbers. Some things to really celebrate. For instance, last year, which our fiscal year ends June 30th, last year we provided 97 million nutritious meals in North Texas. That's huge. And of that, we have great news in the fact that we surpassed our 10-year strategic plan of 92 million meals 5 years ahead of schedule. So just think of that. 5 years because of the pandemic. So it's good news, it's bad news at the same time. Our goal this year, which started July 1st, is to provide 105 million nutritious meals. It makes you have to take a deep breath when you think of that. Yeah. But there is good news in that too, in the fact that we're ahead of schedule. And that's possible because of each one of you taking on that responsibility, and it's so much appreciated.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you. And like you said, you kind of have to take a deep breath and think about these numbers. And the Indian American community in North Texas is very concerned about the state of affairs that you have shared, both of you. And we are rising almost in unison to help feed our neighbors. 8 million meals enabled in 3 years in itself is a feat. But since March this year, since COVID hit, North Texas-based Indian American community has raised more than $300,000. Over 250,000 of those during our COVID Impact fundraiser. and about 60,000 during Hunger Mitau month in August. We are, just as I know all of you are, very proud of how this community has rallied with Hunger Mitau. My question to both of you, if you had a crystal ball, what would you say you see for the next year? How long do you see this increased need for food to go on? Is it months? Is it a year? Is it longer? What do you think?
Sure. I mean, I'll answer that nationally, and Erin, you can provide a lens for local. You know, as I mentioned, when people experience setbacks that cause them this much disruption in their lives, I mean, there are people that went months without paychecks, is very hard to dig out of that hole. And it can be a very long-term struggle. And this is a, you know, this is a different than the disasters that the Feeding America Network is used to responding to. We do have a lot of experience with hurricanes and flooding, and, you know, the network can come together and share resources across the country. The difference, of course, here is all 200 food banks in the network were very adversely impacted, and every community in the country has rising numbers of food insecurity. So it's not just one region, and it's a continuing disaster with you know, we're not sure when it will end. So for people to be able to recover and repair and get back to where they were before the pandemic started could take years. The good news is, I don't want to be all doom and gloom from Feeding America. The good news is we're also experiencing a level of awareness across the board for this issue and our network that we have never seen in our 40+ history. People care about hunger more than ever before. They're realizing how close we all are to that precipice of having to make those choices. Do I pay for the lights and utilities, or do I pay for food? And unfortunately, food is very often the first thing cut from the budget.
So as far as what we see in our crystal ball, or I see in my crystal ball, is just like you said, Brianna, I call it a long road, a long road, probably 18 to 24 months at the very least, in order to get businesses back where they're open and ready to hire new people. Then people have to start getting a paycheck. They have to get their lives back on course. And if you've ever been in that situation, you know it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. So once the businesses are open and then the people are back to work, things will start returning to normal. But it's not today. It's not tomorrow. Think about 2022, 2023. It will get back to normal, and we are optimistic, but it's not going to be tomorrow.
Thank you. And, you know, from everything that is being talked about today, it's very clear that this is the time where communities need to kind of carry each other, right? And I heard recently in one of the conferences that Raj and I were in, that if you've ever wanted to give, ever, you know, if you put aside your rainy day fund of, you know, when something happens, I'm going to make this donation, please do it today. Today is the rainy day, right? I don't know, I hope we don't see anything worse, right? But you know, it's still great news from our perspective, because we have never seen the community rise like it has, right? Hunger Mitau has become a household word. Everybody knows that giving by themselves has some impact, but giving together as a community, we are able to make the needle move, right? So Hunger Mitau and everybody supporting it is working to help as long as there is this need.
So friends, we are not out of the woods yet. Our communities are still depending on each other. Please give whatever you can this holiday season. When each dollar helps feed 3 meals, every dollar makes an impact. Please visit ntfb.org/hungermitau to make a donation to North Texas Food Bank.
So until next week, friends, remember, we may never be able to eradicate hunger, but let us ensure no one goes hungry, especially this holiday season.
Hunger Mitau.